Hello and welcome to uh, the Biosafety Biosecurity Mentorship Program for Northwestern Province. So we are now in session 9. So in session 9, we'll look at the part 3 of the biorisk assessment sessions. So in part 3, we'll basically look at biosecurity risk assessment. So in part 1, we introduced risk assessment. Then in part 2, we looked at a biosafety risk assessment. So in this particular session, we'll look at some principles of biosecurity risk assessment. So by the end of this session, you should be able to describe the process of conducting a biosecurity risk assessment. Then you should be able to explain the components of the biorisk management strategy. So we'll just do a bit of a recap here. So like we defined it in part 1 and part 2. So risk is simply the likelihood of an undesirable event happening that involves a specific hazard or threat and has consequences. Or we can simply say risk is a function of both the likelihood of something happening and the consequences of that occurrence. So more information on the definition on risk can be found in part 2 and part 1 of the risk assessment sessions. So let's look at the definition of biosecurity risk assessment. So a biosecurity risk assessment is an analytical procedure designed to characterize and evaluate security risks. So you are characterizing and evaluating security risks in your laboratory. So if you are not in a laboratory setup, you are looking at the facility itself that you are actually working in, and you are evaluating and characterizing the security risks. So a laboratory biosecurity risk assessment should consider every asset, every adversary, and every vulnerability that you have within your institution. So by institution, we mean maybe the laboratory area or the facility itself where the laboratory is, resides. So it also includes its component laboratories and units like I just explained. So what is the biorisk management strategy? So here I'll just outline the steps. So if you need more information on the biorisk management strategy, you can look at part 2 of the biorisk assessment session, which is session 9. So that session explains this biorisk management strategy a little bit more in detail. So here I'll just briefly outline or just point out the steps of the biorisk management strategy. So the strategy, the first thing you need to do is you need to describe work activities. Then you need to identify hazards and identify any threats. So in the case of the biosecurity risk assessment, what we are concentrated mostly on is identifying the hazards and mostly the threats. Then you determine your risks. So this part is known as risk characterization of the biorisk management strategy. Then after you find that your risks have been determined, you can now decide whether or not the risks that you found are acceptable or unacceptable. If they are acceptable, you continue with the work, so you proceed with work, but you monitor the control measures that you've already put in place. If not, you do other steps that will follow that I'll highlight. So this part where you're deciding whether or not a risk is acceptable and also determining the level of the risk is what we are calling your risk evaluation. So if you're able to put up extra mitigation measures, so you prepare a risk control action plan, then after that you implement the control measures. So this part where you are preparing the risk control action plan and implementing the control measures, this is what we are calling the risk mitigation. Then after that, you need to check the adequacy, or you need to review the adequacy of the implemented action items or action plans or control plans. So this part is called your performance of your AMP. So after you check the adequacy, you go back again and decide whether or not the risk is acceptable. If it's acceptable at this point, you proceed with work, but if it's not, you go back again and prepare risk control action items until all your unacceptable risks are acceptable and you proceed with the work in the laboratory. But if you cannot manage to either reduce or eliminate the risks, the next step is that you need to revise or close the project. So for hazard identification, so this is similar with the biosafety risk assessment hazard identification. So for more information on the points, you can see session 8 for more detailed explanation of the points. So you can either do a literature review, you can do your agent identification and classification, you can do your process mapping, you can do your facility and equipment inspection, you can look at the historical data review, you can look at interviews, or you can conduct interviews and consultations with the lab personnel or subject matter experts, or you can review your standard operating procedures. You can also do a checklist-based type of assessment for you to identify your hazards. You can do observation of the work practices. Then you can also use some softwares that will help you identify the various hazards that may be potential threats, or the hazards that may be used in form of misuse or misused, or maybe stolen, or maybe diverged. So you look at the hazards. You can identify the hazards through these various steps. So the steps which have been highlighted in bold are mostly what we'll use when we start doing our risk assessment for this program. So let's look at how we determine risk when you are doing a biosecurity risk assessment. So how do you determine the risks? So the thing that is mostly different between biosafety risk assessment and biosecurity is this step where you're determining the risk. So whilst you're doing a biosafety risk assessment, after you do your hazard identification, the next thing you just need to look at is the properties about the agents that will contribute to the likelihood and or consequence of exposure. Then after that, you can determine your risk. But then for biosecurity, there's another step that we need to take if we are to determine the risk for a biosecurity risk assessment. So the first thing is risk characterization. So there is a risk characterization as well in biosafety risk assessment. But then for biosecurity, mostly the risk characterization includes an in-depth analysis of laboratory assets, the potential adversaries, and the vulnerabilities in your laboratory. So you're mostly looking at three things when you're characterizing your risk. You're looking at the assets, you're looking at the potential adversaries, and the laboratory vulnerabilities. So you're looking at these in detail. So characterizing biosecurity risks includes, of course, like earlier mentioned in the previous slides, an in-depth analysis or a more detailed analysis of laboratory assets, potential adversaries, and laboratory vulnerabilities. So these three are interlinked because the asset will tell you something about the potential adversaries. The potential adversaries will tell you something about the vulnerabilities. The asset will tell you something about the vulnerabilities as well. Same with the vulnerabilities. So the vulnerabilities will tell you something about how the adversary can acquire your asset. So these three are interlinked. So you can look at your assets and then you look at your vulnerabilities as well as your potential adversaries. So these are more of interlinked and they relate to each other. And a combination of analysis of these three will tell you something about the likelihood of misuse or theft, or the likelihood of diverging whatever you are considering to be an asset in your lab. So let's look at what really um, will help you do your asset characterization. So remember, so we are going to look at these three in detail: the asset, the vulnerabilities, and potential adversaries. So how do you analyze these three parts of the risk characterization so that you have a clear picture of your likelihood and consequences in your security as well as in your biosecurity risk assessment? So let's look at the asset characterization. So what are you doing in asset characterization? So in asset characterization, the main goal is to identify the assets that you have in your laboratory. So remember, by definition, biosecurity is the safeguarding of your biological agents that you have in your lab. But then when you're doing a biosecurity risk assessment, you'll need to identify which of these biological agents that you're handling in your lab may be more valuable than others. So the more valuable assets or the more valuable biological agents are what we will now term as assets, because they will be valuable, therefore they are assets. So it's these assets that will then strengthen the security aspect to how they are kept, how they are handled, and the access that you have to these assets. So when you're doing your hazard identification, you may have a lot of potential assets that you identify. So you may have a lot of biological agents that you may be working with in your laboratory. But not all of the biological agents may be considered assets. The adversaries will not want maybe everything that you have in your lab. So you need to identify which of these biological agents are valuable enough, so valuable that someone may want to come in and actually get them and misuse them. So there are certain attributes, there are certain factors, or there are certain characteristics about the assets that will make them valuable. So what are these characteristics that will make a biological agent to now be an asset and others not really be assets? So when you are looking at characterizing your asset, you look at what is it about this particular biological agent will contribute to the chances or the likelihood of an adversary coming to get it. So what is making it valuable? What can entice an adversary to come and get it? So you look at the chances that will increase, or you look at the aspect of the probability about this, the likelihood about this particular agent that will increase the likelihood of someone coming to get this asset. Then also you need to look at, okay, if this particular asset, let's say if, or this particular biological agent is acquired, what is it about this particular biological agent? What properties about the biological agent will make the consequence to be high, such that someone may want to come and get it? So there are certain factors that will contribute to the asset being wanted and the asset being of high consequence or impact, such that someone may want to come and get it, because if they get it, they know that they are going to do a lot of damage by either intentionally exposing people and then or intentionally exposing themselves and the like. So what factors about the agent will increase the chances of a thief or an adversary coming in, or what will make it valuable enough for someone to come and try to get it? So let's look at the likelihood pattern, the chances. So what is increasing the chance of someone coming to get that biological agent? So we'll look at the virulence. So under virulence, we're simply saying how infectious is this particular type of agent, and how quickly do you get an infection, or how quickly do you get sick after you get exposed to this particular agent. So if this agent has a high virulence, then this agent will be more valuable to me as a thief, because I know if I get it, I can quickly manipulate it and I can quickly infect other people, and people can get sick. Therefore, because it has that high virulence. Therefore, the high virulence has increased the chances of this biological agent becoming an asset, because then it can be used as a bioweapon per se. Next thing is the environmental stability. So under environmental stability, we're trying to say how long can this particular biological agent stay alive in the environment. So the longer it can stay alive in the environment, the more valuable it becomes to me as a thief, because if it can stay longer on surfaces and everything, all I need to do as an adversary who wants to harm people is get it, spread it across the surfaces, and whoever comes into contact with it will get infected with it, because it has a high environmental stability. Therefore, I will be more interested in this particular agent that has a high or has a higher environmental stability. Mode of transmission. So the mode of transmission is simply how do people get exposed to it. So do you get exposed to it by just inhaling it? Do you get exposed to it by percutaneous, where you need to prick yourself? Or do you need to ingest it to get exposed? Or do you need like form of submucosal type of exposure? So for the mode of transmission, the agents that are mostly transmitted through inhalation as well as contact will increase the chances of me trying to get it, because if I get something that you can inhale and you get exposed, or I just touch you and if you touch another person, they get exposed, it means that I can quickly infect a lot of people in a very short time. So therefore, this particular agent that has inhalation as well as maybe contact type of mode of transmission will be more valuable to me than an agent which has maybe you need to prick people for them to get exposed, because then it becomes a bit of tedious for me as an adversary. Maybe if I'm a terrorist, it means that I'll need to prick each and every person for them to get infected. So it won't really spread as much as compared to something which is transmitted through inhalation or through contact. So the infectious dose. So when we're talking about infectious dose, we're saying how little of it do you need for you to get an infection. So the lower the infectious dose, the more valuable it becomes to me, because all I need is just maybe few colonies of it, and then it can spread very widely, because people just need to have to be exposed to like a very minimal dose of it to get infected. So if the agent has low infectious dose, it will be more valuable to me as an adversary. So if your agent has all these properties, it means you are getting closer to actually identifying them to see or to say these may be assets and these others that are maybe not falling or having high virulence, environmental stability. Maybe the mode of transmission is maybe sexual, and maybe the infectious dose is greater, is in the millions and everything. Maybe that one won't be as valuable and therefore may not be considered as an asset. So let's look at the consequence. So what about this agent? Or what may be the consequence if you get exposed to this particular agent, such that now if you get exposed, if the consequence is high, it means that it will be more valuable to me as well as someone who would want to actually get it. So let's look at the host range. So under host range, what we are saying is does this organism infect humans, and can it also infect animals, and can it also infect maybe plants or the environment? If this agent is able to have or has a wider host range, it means that it can spread very quickly, because you can get it by just coming into contact with animals, you can get it by coming into contact with plants, and therefore if I'm an adversary and I'm a terrorist, I would rather get this one that has a wider range of hosts, because all I need to do maybe is to inject some pathogens into a head of cattle. What that means is that the farmers, as they are heading this cattle, they'll get exposed to this pathogen because it can be transmitted. And if the farmers get them, they can also transmit now to other humans, and then those other humans can transmit to other humans. And if the humans come in contact with other cattle that are not infected, then those cattle also become infected. So there's like a wider spread and impact such that the consequence will then be greater, because a lot of host people and animals and everything will be affected, and a lot of people may die, a lot of animals may die, and therefore there's this population impact where maybe a lot of people may die at the particular same time per se, and therefore the impact will be greater as compared to something which can only infect humans. Because if it can infect humans, it means maybe it can't go to cattle, and therefore maybe only humans will die. And if cattle don't die, it means that the food source will be safer, but then what will be affected is the humans. But then if it can affect both humans and animals, it means that if you survive the infection, you will find that maybe you will not have anything to eat in terms of meat, because maybe all your cattle will die. So there will be that economic type of impact as well, because even the people that are selling meat will lose money because their cattle will die. So it will have like an environmental impact as well as population impact, and also an economic type of impact. Availability of treatment or prophylaxis. So if an agent or a pathogen has treatment, it means that if you get sick or you get infected with it, you can quickly just take medication and you get better. But then if it doesn't have treatment, it means that you are going to have a very severe disease from it. And if you have a very severe and prolonged disease, it means that you can transmit it to other people. And therefore, me as an adversary, I would rather have this one which has no treatment. Because if I infect people with this one, it means that it will spread even faster and people get even sicker. If my motive is to kill people and my motive is to make it spread widely, then this one is what I want to get. Therefore, it will be more valuable to me. And therefore, you as a laboratory person who's actually keeping these pathogen will consider them as assets as compared to other biological agents that may have treatment. For example, pathogen replication rate. So how quickly can this pathogen replicate in your body and cause serious disease? So the quicker the replication rate, the more you get sick and the more consequence. And therefore, I would want this one that has a quicker replication rate, because I can quickly manipulate it as well outside of the human body, make you make a lot of copies of it, and then now from these copies you infect other people and the like. Therefore, this one will be more valuable to me. Virulence as well applies to consequence. The more virulent the pathogen, the greater the severity of the disease that you're going to have if you get exposed. Therefore, something with a higher virulence will have a greater impact or consequence. So that's how you do part of the asset characterization. So if your agent is meeting some of the high virulence, high environmental stability, no treatment, then you are getting closer to saying, okay, this one is an asset, and therefore you are looking at the likelihood being increased if people get it. Also, the risk of theft is increasing because this one is a bit of more valuable. So the more valuable the pathogen, the more chances that someone will want to get it, and therefore the higher the risk of theft and higher the risk of misuse and higher risk of divage. Okay. Under asset characterization as well, so some of these I've already touched them. So if your asset is very easy, or if your pathogens are easy to acquire, it means that the risk of theft or misuse becomes a bit higher as well. And therefore, if it is easier to acquire, it makes it an asset as well. If it's easy to just get copies of it and make a lot of copies or replicate copies of it, this also increases the chances of someone getting it, because it's easy to manipulate. I can just quickly manipulate it and I release it into the environment. So, and then dissemination. How quick, how easy is it, or how difficult is it to disseminate this particular agent? So, if the pathogen is a type of pathogen where you can make a powder form of it, where you can create you dry it and then you get like the powder form, like the way maybe you get the anthrax spores and then you can make a lyophilized maybe anthrax. That one becomes a bit more valuable, because you can just quickly disseminate it if it's in powder form, or if you can quickly make it or mix it with certain chemicals, and it will be able to propagate, or to be able to move through the air, through the gases and everything, then that one also becomes a bit more valuable than something that you cannot easily disseminate. Then under the consequences, I've touched the impact on the population, I've touched the economy, and then the impact of changes in public perception. So we saw most of these during the COVID pandemic. So I'm not really saying that COVID was intentionally released. So what I'm saying is that we saw most of these during the COVID pandemic. So there was a very significant population impact where a lot of people died and a lot of people got sick. So the population in some parts of the world reduced because people got sick quickly and then died. Then there was a serious impact on the economy during the COVID pandemic. Like people lost jobs, people lost financially, countries lost money during the COVID pandemic. Then also there was this public perception that came about where people now were just scared. There's fear around because of what happened during the COVID. Like people were just scared to greet each other. There was this public perception about COVID, and therefore it was more of a high impact on people as well, or high consequence, than the impact on facility operations. Some facilities closed, organization closed, and everything because there was that threat of people getting sick or getting infected with COVID. So what I'm trying to say is, if COVID was used as a bioweapon, it can, or if it was used as a bioweapon, it was a very valuable asset, because under the consequence, it hit the population, it hit the economy, it hit public perception. Then also there were a lot of disorganization such that facility operations were disturbed. So I'm not saying that COVID was used as a bioweapon, but then I'm saying if it was, then it was a very, very good asset that was supposed to be kept very, very safely to start with. So let's look at the adversary characterization. So we've looked at the asset. So what about the asset? Now let's look at the adversary. So under adversary characterization or threat assessment, so this is where you're looking at who can come in to get your asset. So what about this person do you need to know that you or what about this particular type of adversary do you need to know that will tell you something about the chances of them coming to get your particular agents or your asset, and the consequence if they get them. So adversary characterization is a process of determining specific attributes of potential adversaries that enable them to pose a threat to a biological agent or toxin. In the security community, adversary characterization is also known as the threat assessment. So you're looking at the threat, because mostly the threat to your assets are your adversaries or people that may want to come in and get your assets. So under adversary characterization, some characteristics of potential adversaries that could help determine the risk they pose include the motive, the means, as well as the opportunity. So under motive, so what motive can someone have to come and get your agents or your assets? So when you're doing your motive type of analysis, you also look at the current happenings maybe around your laboratory. Also, you look at what is happening in the facility itself, what is happening in the area where you've stationed the lab, what is happening in the province, and what's happening in the country. Because what is happening around will tell you something about the motive or the possible motive of some either insider or outsider adversaries. Because if you have instability, let's say in your country, it means that maybe you may have some form of rebel groups that are in the maybe province, or you may have tribal groups, or people that just want to harm other people. So the motive then or the people or the adversaries, you will then know to say, okay, the motive for people that may want to come and get these particular agents is to harm people, because maybe they want to increase the instability that is happening. Or if you have people in your lab that you look at them and then you're like, okay, these people are not really trustworthy because maybe of the happenings that have been happening around the lab, maybe in the past couple of months or years. You know that this person maybe likes to get things and sell the things, such as maybe they get reagents here and there, or they have all sorts of deals happening, or all sorts of programs happening in the lab that are suspicious. Therefore, you can know that this person is a potential adversary, because the motive that they'll have mostly is to make maybe money. All they want is financial type of stability, therefore, or maybe they have financial challenges, and the motive mostly is maybe they'll just get that agent from maybe the fridge and sell it, and that is their motive at that particular point. So mostly the insiders and outsiders will have similar motives, because even the insider can be a terrorist. Because what if they are terrorists and then you don't know and you haven't really checked them out before maybe employing them? Maybe they are terrorists, and then maybe their motive as well is to just get the agents, give that agent to other terrorist groups that they belong to, and then they use them to harm people. So when it comes to motive and looking at the adversaries, whether they are insiders or outsiders, mostly the motives do not really differ if someone is an insider or an outsider. Sometimes even the outsider, all they may need sometimes is just to get that agent and sell it to other people. So they're not really part of the lab, but then they come in, get your agents, and sell to other people. They are not really insiders, they are outsiders. So under means. So if you're looking at your adversaries, you are trying to look at the means. So how can this adversary have access to this particular biological agent or this particular asset? So do they have the means? Can they quickly have access to this particular agent? So if they can have access to this particular agent, it means that the chances of them getting this particular agent increases, and therefore you may try to look at the adversary as either, mostly when we're looking at means, we mostly look at the insider, because mostly the insider will have a greater means than an outsider, because the insider already knows where these organisms are, and therefore access to these particular agents is quicker, and therefore mostly the insider will have greater means than the outsider. Mostly outsiders will not know where they are supposed to get the agents, therefore the means for the outsider becomes a bit lower, because they really are not sure where they can get the agents. But then sometimes an insider can collaborate with an outsider such that the insider will know where the agents are located, and therefore they will give the information to the outsider. So the outsider will then have this information about where they can access the biological agents. So if the outsider gets the information from the insider, indirectly we're saying the outsider got the means from the insider, and therefore the larger threat between the two was the insider and not the outsider. So let's look at opportunity. Under opportunity, we're basically trying to see, we're trying to analyze to say, okay, so for the thief to come in, how quickly or how can they quickly have access to these particular agents without someone noticing that that they actually got these particular agents? So can they get these agents without being noticed? So which means if you can get the agent without being noticed, it means your opportunity becomes greater than someone who can come in and be noticed as they are trying to get the agents. Then also, we will go to the insider-outsider comparison. Here, the insider has greater opportunity because they know where these agents are, they know everyone in the lab, they know the shifts for everyone, and therefore they may just come in at maybe during lunch, they know everyone won't be around, they get a vial of COVID that you're maybe keeping in the freezer, they have access maybe to the inventory and then indicate on the inventory that maybe this particular VAR was discarded because maybe it overstayed. No one will suspect, no one will even notice that this VAR was stolen because everyone will be like, maybe it was just discarded. So the opportunity is greater for the insiders compared to the outsider. For an outsider, it's hard for them to just come in and get because they don't know the systems, they don't know how to move around the lab, the facility or lab without being noticed. So the opportunity becomes less for the outsider. So what does this mean, or what does this tell us about adversaries? What it's simply telling us that most of the time, the bigger threat is the insider as compared to the outsider, because the insider has greater means and greater opportunity as compared to the outsider, even though both the insider and the outsider may have similar motives, but the insider mostly is the bigger threat as compared to the outsider. So now you need to analyze each of these characteristics in terms of likelihood and consequence when you are doing a biosecurity risk assessment. Okay, so we've already touched the types of adversaries. So we have the insider, who is the person who may be working in the facility or lab, and then the outsider is someone who doesn't work in the lab or the facility itself, maybe someone that is just coming from outside or within the area, and that may be a potential thief or adversary or a potential threat to your assets. So now let's look at the vulnerability assessment. So we've touched the asset, we've touched the adversaries. Now let's look at the vulnerabilities. So under vulnerabilities, biosecurity vulnerabilities can be assessed based on each of the biosecurity system's individual components. So what are these biosecurity system individual components? So if you need to set up a biosecurity program, there are 5 pillars of biosecurity that you need to strengthen. And if you strengthen each of these pillars, it means that you're going to have a stronger biosecurity management system or program per se. So what are these systems? So we have the physical security, personnel security, material control and accountability. Then we have transport security and information security. So for you to have a strong biosecurity program, each of these 5 pillars need to be strengthened. So I'll just explain one type of pillar and how do you do a risk assessment with that pillar. So I'll look at physical security. So when you are doing your risk assessment, you look at the vulnerabilities or the gaps that you may have as a lab in relation to all these 5 pillars. But then let's look at physical security. So you ask certain questions about the physical security of where these biological agents or assets are kept. So you look at how's the access control to this particular lab? How's the access control to the freezers where these agents are kept? How's the access to information about this particular type of agents that you're keeping? So if there are a lot of gaps in the access, like people can access your agents, physically access your agents, and there are breaches in the physical security, it means that the likelihood of someone who is an adversary coming in to get your agents increases. So mostly when we're doing a vulnerability assessment, we are looking at the chances of someone coming in to get your assets through the gaps in your 5 pillars. So basically that's that. So you look at information. So how is information being kept about your assets? So if there are breaches in information, like there's no information security, it means that either your insider adversaries or outsider adversaries can get information about your agents, and then they may steal these agents. So I'll make a video just explaining the 5 pillars, but for now, it's just to give you an idea of the 5 pillars. So in the I'll make a video just explaining the 5 pillars so that you can relate to it, and therefore you'll be able to see what each of these 5 components constitutes. But basically, if there are breaches in either of these 5 pillars, it means that there is a high chance of theft, high chance of misuse, and high chance of diversion. Okay, so after you do asset characterization, adversary or threat assessment, and vulnerability characterization, the next thing now you need to do is do an initial type of risk determination. So you look at or you determine the risk of theft. So you determine the risk of theft, then you also determine the risk of misuse by an insider, and then the risk of diverging by an insider. So diverging is just a nicer word to say theft by an insider. So but then it's just theft by an insider, but then we call it diverging. So you do an assessment, or you determine the risk of theft, misuse, and diverging. So risk is evaluated by determining the likelihood and consequence, of course, but then the asset, adversary, and vulnerability characterization steps that you took before doing this determination of the risk will give you hints on where likelihood and consequence may fall for both the theft risk, the misuse risk, and the diverging risk. Then after you do your initial type of risk determination for theft, misuse, and diverging, you then do what we know, what we call scenario type of risk determination. So you look at the process, or you look at activities that affect the asset itself. So you can either map out a process of how maybe this particular agent is either tested or handled or transported. Then through this process or workflow, you then create some form of scenarios which would describe how maybe an adversary may come into contact with the asset and steal it, and what they may use it for. So you create scenarios from the process that you map out. Okay, so each evaluated scenario should involve a specific biological agent, which is that asset now. So now for each particular asset, you look at who are the potential adversaries at each particular point. So you look at the insider as well as the outsider type of adversary, so that at least you would have considered both the inside and outsider threat in the process itself. Then also you look at a particular way that adversary will attempt to steal and misuse the target or the agent, and either the agent or the toxin that you consider to be an asset. But then you should keep in mind that it's always important to have a screening process for scenarios, because you don't want to have a lot of scenarios which may be also irrelevant sometimes. So you want to keep the scenarios to the particular assets that you want to safeguard. Okay, so don't. So how do you make sure that you keep the scenarios targeted to the assets? So this is where now the asset characterization is important, because you may have a lot of biological agents, but if you do a proper asset characterization, you identify which of these agents so as are mostly valuable, and therefore you stick the scenarios to these biological agents that may be valuable, and not the others that may be not really as valuable as the others. So of course you need to document all these things. So you need to document your asset characterization, your adversary, your vulnerability, as well as your scenario type of assessments. So we'll do this when we start doing a biosecurity risk assessment. So under the biosecurity risk assessment, we'll do the asset, we'll look at the adversary, we'll also look at the vulnerabilities type of assessment. Then after that, you determine the risk for each of these scenarios that you've defined. So you look at the likelihood of these scenarios happening and the consequence if the scenario happens. So of course, we are going to use this matrix, which we also used in the biosafety risk assessment. So for more details on this, you can see session 8, which is explaining the matrix as well as the interpretation. Then session 8 is also explaining the severity interpretations and the likelihood interpretations. Then also, it's also telling you, or it's also giving you information on how to rate your likelihoods and your severity, and how do you come up with the risk values. So you can just rewatch the session 8 and you'll be able to get a more of a recap on how to do it. So it's basically the same. The likelihood is determined the same as well as the severity. So you can watch session 8 and you'll be able to get full information on how to determine your risk. Then lastly, of course, if you need further reading on your risk assessment, you can get more information from the documents that have been highlighted here. So you can get more information from the Laboratory Biosafety Manual, the risk assessment monograph, as well as the CWAs and the ISOs. And if you need more information on biosecurity, you'll mostly find it in the WHO Laboratory Biosecurity Guidance. So that's it on session 9 and biosecurity. So as you noticed, the processes are similar, but then the only difference between biosafety and biosecurity risk assessment is in biosecurity you are mostly doing your asset characterization, your adversary characterization, and your vulnerabilities characterization. Then also there's an additional type of risk determination where you're looking at the risk of theft, misuse, and diverge before you go to your scenarios. So even in biosafety, we will look at the scenarios or risks that you need to more of create in the process or in the activities that you're doing. So if you have any questions or any clarification you need, please leave a comment in the comment section, or you can get in touch with me so that we see how we can clarify some of the missed points. So that's it on session 9, which is part 3 of the biorisk assessment. So in session 10, we'll start looking at the templates. So we'll start with the biosecurity risk assessment template. We'll start with the biosafety risk assessment template in session 10. So that will be like part 4 of the sessions. Then in session 11, we'll look at the biosecurity risk assessment template. So see you in the next session.